A pleasant good day to all of our viewers and listeners. We welcome you to Marriage Encounter. We are delighted to be in the studios of Second Advent Radio. Good day, Pastor Adams.
Good day to everyone, Dr. Greene. It is a delight to be in studio, physically in studio this morning. And we are always glad to have our viewers and listeners join into Marriage Encounter. And I would normally say to them, just make sure you call somebody up and share this connection so that they can be a part of what we're going to discuss. Always intriguing, always interesting. And we are ready to go.
Well, before we go, we want to have a word of prayer. We invite you, if you're able to, just bow for a word of prayer. Eternal Father and our God, we thank you for another day, for another opportunity to share with our friends in Radio Lands, those who are listening via the internet. We ask, oh God, that the principles and ideas that we share today will prove meaningful in building stronger marriages for you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Now, for the last few weeks, we have been discussing conflict. And because conflict is so real, because conflict is such a, should I say, a regular part of life, we're going to really take some time to deal with various dimensions of conflict.
Mhm.
Today, we want to look at another dimension. Last week, the weeks prior, we have been looking at conflict when one of the marriage partners has an issue, imperfection, lack of maturity, as the case may be. Today, we want to consider conflict from a different dimension. And so we're talking about hurt feelings that are nobody's fault. Now, that may sound strange to some of our listeners. Nobody's fault. So what are we talking about here, Pastor Adams?
Yes, and while you announced, while you said that just nobody's fault, something came to my mind, which is aside from our discussion. I wonder if that's the reason why people go ahead and get no fault divorces, because it's nobody's fault, right? Yes. So hard feelings when it is nobody's fault. What we're actually saying is that neither of the parties are wrong.
So you can have a conflict
So
when nobody's
it's
wrong.
a situation where neither persons are wrong, but it has to do with how one particular person, what makes it a conflict then, it has to do with how one particular person responds in that situation, right? And as you said in your opening remarks, conflicts are normal to life, and particularly we're dealing with marriage now, and it is necessary for us to look at all these dimensions because as simple as we will look at, these can cause real escalations in the relationship, in the marriage, right? So hurt feelings are normal. Hurt feelings are normal. It is how it is managed that is most important. In other words, to allow further feelings being hurt or unawareness or insensitivity, there is need for conversation, a discussion. Let us talk. Why? Because when one's feelings is hurt, it doesn't automatically mean that somebody did something that is wrong. It just means that your feelings got hurt.
Well, I would like to put it this way, because all of this we're discussing in the context of boundaries. And I remember when we started discussing this idea of boundaries, we did say that you are responsible for your feelings. You don't blame other people for your feelings. Take ownership of how you feel. So if I can use a practical example, just so that our viewers and listeners can get a sense of what we're talking about. So let's say I get home and my wife is not home. I expected her to be home, but she's not home. And an hour passes, she's not home as yet. and I begin to feel a sense of abandonment. I
Mm-hmm.
begin to say, well, my wife
Mm-hmm.
didn't tell me she's not going to be home, and and I begin to allow my imagination to run wild. And then when she eventually gets home, innocently, she probably, expecting everything to be okay. Honey, I'm home, and I am, not looking very cheerful because I'm upset. My
Mm-hmm.
feelings are hurt.
Yes.
And I tend to blame her for my hurt feelings, but these are my feelings. These are not her feelings,
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, although I may say you came home late and so I'm angry, anger, um, feeling rejected or disappointed, those are my feelings. I can't say it is her fault why I am, because reality is, I mean, she may have had a legitimate reason for being out late,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's not her fault. It's not my fault. This is how I feel. I must take responsibility for my feelings.
Yeah. And that's why the conversation is so important, because you don't know why. But again, I'm glad that you mentioned that just when we were talking, when we were discussing boundaries, you have to take responsibility and ownership for your feelings, which your spouse, your partner may not have anything to do with whatsoever, because your hurt feelings, when it is triggered, you want to use that term, and I think that is what Gottman says. When those hurt feelings are triggered, because these hurt feelings that are triggered can have their genesis, has nothing to do with your spouse. It could be from your past, could be from a former relationship if you've been in one before you met or get married to this spouse. It could be from your childhood past. Because if you feel a sense of abandonment during your childhood, then you may feel that way, and in the exact scenario that you're presenting, you know. And so there are many situations where we need to look back. And somebody said, the author, William Faulkner, says that, you know, the past isn't dead. The past isn't dead. In fact, it isn't even past. So there are a lot of times when sometimes the hurt feelings are triggered simply because we have some hurt feelings from the past that were not dealt with, that we did not, get the healing and the closure too. And it is all comes along now in this current experience, this current relationship. And there's another experience I could think about, because there was a particular lady who had an incident. I think it was some incident on the job, and she injured her neck. Now her husband comes to pick her up. They're driving home, and hurt feelings. He isn't aware now. She's experiencing pain because she hit her neck, and then while he's driving, he asks her to use the window on her side to help him navigate the traffic, and she felt that, well, he was insensitive. Her feelings was hurt, and then she responded to him in ways that hurt his feelings, right?
And,
But
and, and
now,
here's the challenge, because I was about to say that we do have regularly conflicts in marriage life that are not the result of anybody's fault. And we can enumerate so many of them today. You may have a situation where a husband likes one thing, a wife like, let's take, the wife likes to sleep with the fan on. The husband doesn't like the fan.
Mhm.
Now she has a reason for wanting the fan. He has a reason for not wanting the fan. Now, now if she puts on the fan, he may say she's insensitive. It's not her fault that she needs a fan. It's not his fault that she wants it, etc. So these are just some examples of how we can have challenges. One person likes to watch a particular kind of television shows, another person likes a different kind, and there's only one television in the house. So how do we deal with this?
I could relate to that right now.
And what you can have is a situation where you begin to blame your spouse, And I think it was Cloud and Towson who said, you go to court, you
Yes.
begin an argument
An
and try
argument.
to prove that it is your fault why this is so.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge of wanting to be right, wanting to prove yourself to be in the right, can create a lot of challenges for marriage relationships.
Yeah.
And what we're suggesting is that you need to develop a particular approach to dealing with issues like this when they come up.
Yeah. And one author that I was reading said that because these are inevitable, we have to identify the hurt feeling in our past, take responsibility, and that is so important. Unless I forgot, I was reading somewhere else. Oh, I was listening to a fellow presenter. I think it was Dr. Chilton, and I just something I was writing on healing, and it's so much come together while you're listening. Hurting people hurt people, or
Mm-hmm.
hurt people. So you, and that's what happens because I am having this hurt, I may in turn hurt you, when none of us are really responsible for this situation. So remember, you just mentioned how we treat with it, how we approach it, and I think Gottman says we should have a recovery conversation. A recovery conversation is not, you're not going to court now to prove who is right or who is wrong. A recovery conversation is simply acknowledging that yes, this happened and my spouse is hurt, and how do I respond? I have to respond with care, with empathy, with compassion, you see, and what I say must help my spouse in the situation to recover from these hurt feelings. And while they have to take responsibility for it, I am part, as a spouse, I am part of helping to help you to heal and to recover from whatever past hurt. So I have to be mindful as to the conversation, how I say what I have to say. And the I language is so very, very important, right? I can see why your feelings are hurt, very important. I am so sorry it happens. Your feeling mattered to me. That kind of response is loaded with care, compassion, empathy. Right? And that is how you want to respond in a situation like that.
And that is very important, Pastor. That pertains to the individual on the other side of the table. I want to go back a little bit to the individual who is experiencing the hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I want to use a practical example because I want our viewers and our listeners to be able to identify with what we're saying. So you are married, you and your spouse both cook. This is the example I choose to use. You got home before your spouse, or your spouse alerted you that he or she is going to be late today, and out of the goodness of your heart, you decide, let me fix dinner. You decide to do your favorite meal. This is the way you like it. Incidentally, your wife doesn't like it that way, but you probably don't know it because she has always eaten it when you prepare it that way. And she comes home and she sees the meal. At first, she's happy that you prepared dinner, but when she sits down and she realizes that it is done this way, she says, "You're so insensitive. You always prepare this meal this way, and I don't like it that way,"
Mm-hmm.
and that creates some hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And she begins to think that, well, she or he, whoever it is, begins to think that you are insensitive, you are selfish, you always look after your own interest. Now, you are not responsible for hurting your spouse. You may not even have recognized that your spouse did not appreciate the meal that particular way. Um, so I want to address the spouse who is hurting here. I think one of the first things you need to do is to acknowledge the fact that you are hurting. Accept the reality. I don't feel good about this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hurting. And we mentioned this before, Pastor Adams. Resist the temptation to go to courts. because when you go to court, you know, if you as a child growing up, I used to there was a program on television called Crown Court. I
Mm-hmm.
used to enjoy watching, the arguments back and forth, and most times one person wins, another person loses. Well, in this case, in a husband and wife situation, you are supposed to be on the same side. You can't be arguing in courts because you're on the same side. You don't watch a court case and see a lawyer opposing his client. They're on the same side. They should be speaking the same language. When you go to court, what you're effectively doing is that you're arguing against yourself and you're
Mm-hmm.
destroying the
Mm-hmm.
relationship. So acknowledge that you're feeling hurt, resist the temptation to go to court. And then I want to come to what you said, communicate. You quoted Gottman in terms of the appropriateness in responding a certain way.
Mm-hmm. And in that sense, the scenario that you proffered it just now is not one, but it's both persons are feeling hurt. Because if I come ahead and prepare meal out of my care and love for my spouse, because I realize the person would have had a hard day, a full day, and to come home and prepare dinner, why not do this? And then it is spawned upon because it takes a lot of to put into making a meal, particularly our spouses who are the women when they put a meal together and you come and spawn over it or make a fuss over it, so it is both persons' feelings who hurt, and that is why it is so important, because when you have this conversation, because you said acknowledge, and that is so important, right? And going back to some former presentation that we made on here, acknowledging in the sense to justify, just like when we're dealing with like anger, it is justifiable? Do I have a right to be angry? No. Acknowledge that I am feeling hurt. Why am I having this hurt feeling? So as we begin to answer those questions and ask ourselves those questions, when we're going to have the conversation now, it is so very important that there is now this awareness, because you're now having a conversation, and so you know what will engender this hurt feelings, and you can even preempt it or even avoid it altogether, because now you know, right? And you're having a conversation as to what is going to cause or what can possibly cause hurt feelings in the spouse. So it's so very crucial to have the conversation.
I just want to go back to something you mentioned there. When the illustration I use, and you said it's not just one person who is hurting, it's both.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what happens a lot of times. Initially, one person is hurting, but as you said, hurting people hurt others.
Yes.
And the response when we try to blame, when we try to cast aspersions on others, you are responsible for my feeling this way or the other, then there is this almost rebuttal, the fighting back, trying to get even. And that is when we say don't go to court, that's what we're talking about. When your spouse expresses the hurt feeling or blames you and you seek to justify yourself, then you are going back and forth as though you're in court. And I would like our listeners at this time just to be honest with themselves. How many times do you find you and your spouse arguing over a matter that at the end of the day is no big deal? You argue till you get vexed, until you get vexed, and you go to sleep, and tomorrow morning you get up and you forget it and you move on. But then that cycle happens again and
Right.
again and again, and it wears you down, it wears you out after a while. So we are saying, seek not to do that. When you recognize that you're hurting, and those questions that Pastor Adams highlighted just now, why am I feeling this way? Do I have a right to feel this way? Is this because of what my spouse did? Or, what happened? Because you again, Pastor Adams, earlier you mentioned that it could be as a result of some deficiency in your past.
Yes.
Maybe you were abandoned by your parents,
Yeah.
and you grew up with this desire, this overwhelming desire to want to be around people and to be appreciated and respected. And
Yeah.
when you're not getting it from the spouse the way you think you require it, then you fall back into that childhood immature
Yes.
way
Yeah.
of behaving.
You want your spouse to account for this loss in your prior experience. And so this is so very important. And in my, I like to share from my experience because as you're an educator, people think that, well, you have it made, your relationship is so perfect. I had to deal with this in my own experience because my wife's father did not was not working at home for a significantly long time. He was working in another country, right? So when we discuss expectations with the counselor towards marriage, he pointed that out, right? He pointed that out. So does she expect me to fill this void? And the council was making that point. No, no, no. He can't really fill this void that and so our past, and I like what this author said. Our past isn't dead; it is even past. So a lot of times, sometimes when these hard feelings, and so that's why we have to ask ourselves those questions: is it what my spouse said or did, or is it something in my past experience that I have to probably go back to and address it? And that is why the conversation is so very important, that we must have this conversation, because it definitely helps us to avoid, preempt some of these situations, some of these things that may well lead to. In fact, we can come to a stalemate or a dead end. And that's what I was saying, because the example that you gave first, the spouse ended up saying why she was late. And then the response was what, because I said instead of the situation becoming de-escalated, it became more escalated. She was actually running an errand for him. And then she said, well, if that's going to be your response the next time, take care of your business yourself. Go look after your shirt yourself. She was actually going to deal with something in the store for
It's
him.
interesting. It's interesting.
It's just
and that's the interesting thing there, because if you have a situation where the wife went out to take care of the husband's needs, let's say his clothing, right? Now, when he gets home and he doesn't meet his wife and she takes long in coming back, he feels hurt. And when she comes, even when he hears that, well, it's your business I was fixing, because he's in that frame of mind, he's not reasoning appropriately. And so he may say something like, yeah, you enjoy spending money, so you're out there doing that.
yeah.
And she may get back by saying, next time you're going to fix your own business, I'm not going to do it for you again.
Yeah.
And what happens is that each person, you said that they're escalating because each person now wants to justify his or her behavior. And so they step up one round on the ladder to make sure that they win. And when you keep escalating like that, you may end up in a situation where you get so high on the ladder that you fall, and it is not a good place to be at all.
Yes, and you said something. I don't want our listeners of yours to miss that, because we are talking about intimacy, right, and this relationship, and how, because if that experience keep reoccurring all the time, these hurt feelings, and then we just don't talk to it, we don't discuss it, we go on to face another day. Over time, it is affecting the intimacy, the relationship. We are distancing ourselves. That is what is actually happening. So we don't want to just take these things lightly. In fact, my Spanish professor, I'm not remembering his name, saying that is why for every unpleasant experience, for every one unpleasant experience, you should have 11 positive experiences or interactions of this nature. And I like the coinage, how the Gottman puts it. You must have a recovery conversation, right? Is it necessary to have these recovery conversations after every unpleasant incident that has triggered these hurt feelings?
Now, let's dwell a little on that, because a lot of times what happens in reality is we argued last night, we went to sleep, we get up in the morning, we don't discuss it, we don't say anything. You may leave home with a half-hearted see you later or something to that effect, and we get in the run of things for the day, and the next afternoon we come home and we just continue living normally. without ever dealing or addressing the issue that we had last night.
Yeah.
And a cycle develops, but that is dangerous because after a while, as I said before, it's going to wear you out. So the matter of having the recovery conversation is important because it adds value to your relationship. It tells you that you care enough to want to make sure that you don't have unresolved issues. And so when you can sit down with your spouse and say, honey, I see that you were hurting. I can appreciate the way you felt. That, that approach, that empathic approach softens the atmosphere and makes your spouse know that you care, that you love. And so you're replacing the court scene with compassion and empathy, which is like healing therapy to the relationship.
And then you are at the same time you are building the emotional bank, and at the same time you are making that kind of approach, you are making real heavy deposit, and at the same time you're building emotional bank. And I also want our viewers and listeners to hear that men also have an emotional bank. Men have emotions just like women. And that emotional bank needs to be addressed and fixed and replenished just the same, right? So there are several spill-off benefits to this when you have a conversation and when you talk to the matter, and don't just make it to become a normal, just like a cycle, and think that it is okay. It's going to show up somewhere in the future. And the response might not be one that is going to be pleasant, because that can happen after you have been pushed to the. In fact, people even make decisions to abandon, to leave relationships as a result of these things, right? That's why this no fault divorce thing was going through my mind. I believe these are some of the things, because when you look at the 15 reasons why people walk away from relationships, this is mentioned as one of them.
And we don't want you to overlook it because it is so common. So in the minute that we have remaining, we just want to reemphasize that you can examine your life and look at the things that you argue about every day. Take responsibility for your feelings and show empathy. Recognize that, listen, this may not be my fault, it may not be your fault. I feel upset, I feel abandoned. It's not necessarily my spouse's fault. My spouse has a right to feel a certain way, to feel sad, to feel lonely, to feel abandoned, to feel hurt. That's okay. I have a right to feel that way too. I must not think that because I'm feeling a certain way, it is my spouse's fault, not your spouse's fault. And neither should you blame yourself for feeling that way, But remember, in life, there are feelings.
Yes.
The ebb and flow of life will bring good times and bad times, and we have to sort them out, work them through by the grace of God.
In normal life, that is it. In normal life, that is it, right?
So before we end, Pastor Adams, I want to sensitize the listeners in Antigua. I know people listen all over the world, but those in Antigua, I want to sensitize you to the fact that we did mention some time ago that we are planning a marriage retreat. I don't remember the date.
Directly for couples. It's going to be somewhere at the end of August.
Yes.
We're going to tell you the exact date. I think it should be the last weekend, somewhere there in August, because that begins the first week of September. Yeah.
Now, I want to say that this is a special event for couples.
Yes.
It is going to cost,
yes,
because where we're going and what we're doing, there's going to be material, there's going to be a book that we're hoping to give everybody that they can use as reference material.
Refreshment.
There's going to be lunch, there's going to be refreshment, and the atmosphere, the ambience is going to be outstanding. So begin to plan for it, begin to put aside some funds. We're going to give you more next week. That's all the time we have for today. So until then, may God bless you.